Welcome everyone to today's webinar. We're very excited to get started with another webinar here. We're talking today about really being proactive, and I think if you want proactiveness, we're definitely showing it now because we're still about 2 months away from hurricane season to start. But there's so much going on with the change of El Nino to a La Nina, so we thought it was only right to make sure that we're getting ahead of it so that both our CAMs and board members are prepared. There's so much going on with condo legislation now. There's potentially new HOA legislation, so it's better to get these things going now so that at the end, by the time season is really here, that you're well prepared. So we're excited to have you on today. We have the great pleasure of having Aaron Nickerson. We've been a while since we do something together. Super excited to have you back on. Erin's the director of sales for Unlimited Restoration, but I'll give her the floor to tell us a little bit about herself and the firm, and we'll get started.
Thank you, Raphael. Good morning, everybody. My name is Erin Nickerson, and my company is called Unlimited Restoration. We're a licensed general contractor that specializes in emergency and disaster services, so fire, water, mold, hurricane damage, amongst other things. You said my favorite word today, and it's being prepared. And how can we prepare you better this hurricane season than you've ever been prepared for before? I've been in this industry now for 10 years in disaster planning and preparation, and I can tell you right now, last year with Hurricane Ian was a big learning curve for all of us to deal with a Category 5 hurricane that hit multiple areas in the entire state of Florida. Fortunately, we were a little bit lucky here in the Tri-County, but that doesn't mean that we can't plan better based off of our experiences from everybody else and what they experienced across the state. So with that being said, thank you for having me, Raphael, and I'll give you the floor back.
Sure. Thank you so much, Aaron. As for myself, my name is Rafael Aquino. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Affinity Management Services. As most of you know already by now, we've been a thought leader when it comes to community association manager. Here at Affinity, we got ourselves by our proven process, which is align, execute, deliver, helping our associations align to their vision. Then we help them execute that, and we're the only organization proud to say that we guarantee our results for our community. But enough about us. I think our listeners are here to learn a little bit more about hurricane preparation and so forth. I did wanted to remind our listeners today that the Q&A is open. So if you have any questions that you'd like answered by either Aaron or myself, please go ahead and put it in the Q&A. We'll do our best to get to it. Do keep in mind that we will only touch up on topics that relate to today's webinar. Any other topics that you have, you can reach out to either Aaron or myself individually, and we'll do our best to get those answers to you. But so today we're going to talk about being proactive and the approach to property damage and response. I think it's important to advise our listeners of just what's going on or what's expected. It's a little bit early. We're around March 20th. Hurricane season opens up on June 1st. But if you start doing some research, you start to see that right now predictions are a little bit all over the map just because NOAA hasn't come out with their predictions yet. But you do have TSR, which is tropical storm risk, is saying that they're expecting about 20 storms, 9 hurricanes, and 4 major hurricanes. I'm sure you would agree with me, Aaron, that South Florida has been very fortunate, and unfortunately the West Coast not as much, or Northern Florida not as much, or the Panhandle. But it's only a matter of time. I'm definitely not trying to fearmonger here, but it's important to understand that we're going through a transitionary phase. So I'm not a meteorologist, but I do like to do my research before our webinars. And we're in the process of transitioning from El Nino to La Nina, and that's occurring. It's already in the process of it occurring. So what that means is that we have less high wind shear when it's El Nino, high wind shear, and that helps inhibit hurricanes a bit more. Now that we're transitioning, we don't have that. We're not going to have that wind shear. So there's a higher probability. Doesn't mean it's going to happen, but there is a higher probability that we can experience more hurricanes because of this effect. So with that said, I guess I wanted to start, Aaron, with our first question. How can managers, because we have a good amount of managers on today's call and board members, prepare their property for to properly operate it during hurricane season, or I should say prior to hurricane season?
Great question. So I think it's a twofold approach, right? There's operationally, what can we do? And then paperwork preparation, what can we do? And I want to talk about operations because that's the easy part, preparing
Mhm.
your property prior to storm season. I think the most important part about storm preparation is actually being really specific with your property details. So let's think about that. If we have a condominium building, which I see a lot of your managers on here, so I'm going to start there. If you have your condominium building, you think about all of the items that you have to maintain. So maybe you have a cooling tower, HVACs on the roof itself, the structure of the building, and all of the components that maybe you have a maintenance contract on. All of those things should be checked prior to hurricane season that they're in proper working order, and we should have documentation of our maintenance records stored in one location. Maybe you have a drive at Affinity Management
Mhm.
that you keep all of that on. Maybe it's an actual binder at an on-site property, but it needs to live in a certain place. And why that's important is if we do end up getting a storm, you have an accurate record that you've been properly maintaining these items. So that way, when you go to file your insurance claim, you can say, hey, insurance company, here's my documentation that we've been doing everything the right way. Cut us the check for replacement. This is what it looked like before, and now it's 2 streets away after. So that's component number one on the operations side. Documentation. The second part of that documentation and talking about physical operation of preparing your property is making sure your team is involved in this. Does your team know where all the water shutoffs are? Does your team know where all of these mechanicals and the expectations that are set with them? So making sure everybody's on the same page and establishing meetings like we're doing today with your internal on-site property teams, or if you don't have an on-site property team, having the conversation with the board is really, really imperative to the physical preparedness for your property. Hey, board of directors, this is the list that we're going through, so they know what's going on too. Talking about preparedness, right? It's important to have a communication plan for the physical return to your operations after a storm has passed. And that needs to be in writing and communicated to the team. So if you're on site, it becomes very easy to say, property manager's first one back, and then having a phone tree that goes to the next person, to the next person, to the next person, so you can continue your recovery process. I think it becomes more important if you are not a sited property, or maybe you're an HOA and your first responder is going to be a board member. We need to know what that responsibility looks like, and then the communication to the proper channels. I think that that is really where I see a lot of properties either excel because they're doing a great job, or really fall by the wayside and have a hard time recovering because they don't have a proper communication plan when it comes to getting back after a storm. When it
Yeah,
comes
great.
to, go
Sorry, go
ahead,
ahead. Sorry. No, no, go ahead.
you want to jump in?
No, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
The other thing that I need every single one of us on this call to look at is our insurance policy. And I know we're going to talk about that in another question in a few minutes, but it's important to understand what your policy actually says. If you're in a flood zone, you need to make sure you have flood insurance. And it's also a good conversation to have as you're going into renewal season, and that's coming in hot for a lot of our properties right now. The conversation with your insurance agent, is it cost effective for even to have flood insurance if we're not in a flood zone? And I give you this example because the rainfall at the Ponce Inlet for Hurricane Ian was 31.5 inches.
Wow.
That is massive. So think about your property today. If we got hit with a Cat 5 hurricane and you do not have flood insurance for your policy and we got 31.5 inches, could your property sustain damage? Most likely. And that water, once it hits the ground, is considered flood water when it comes into the building. And if you don't have flood insurance, you're going to be coming out of pocket for that. So there's two sides of to the policy that you need to know about: wind-driven rain and flood. And what do you have to work with, dollars and cents, for that? So it's a good conversation to have with your board and your agent now. Those are my
No, and
big
it's
take.
great. Yeah, it's great that you bring those points up, especially the documentation part, because we all know, just speaking from the insurance side, that it's become much more challenging to file claims and get claims paid. There's ways of getting that done, which we'll talk about that a little bit now. I mean, in a few, but that's why I wanted to put up a poll to see where we're at. So roughly, as our attendees answer, we have about 70% say that they do have a hurricane plan. So I applaud you for that. 20% actually say they don't, and 10% said they don't know if they have a hurricane plan. So it's very important, as you mentioned, to not just have it, but also where you have it. I mean, here we keep everything digital, but you want to make sure that where you're keeping that. So if your management company has it, let's say on servers, do you have a generator that your server can make sure it's up? Here we have cloud, so we're not so concerned. But ultimately, it's important of where you have that information. And for condos, for the condo manager, the condo boards that are on the call, hopefully you've gone through your milestone or you've already started that and you have some documentation of where your equipment is at. Hopefully you've taken pictures as you're doing these reports, and now's a good time to be able to get those pictures and update whatever needs to be updated from the hurricane plan itself. So Aaron, what should managers or board members have prepared in the event of an emergency? Like, is there anything, I guess, that you say that from your experience, because I know you've been doing this for years, you're an expert in your space. What have you seen where maybe managers fall short, that it's just something that gets missed, and what are the common things that they should have prepared?
Great question. I'm going to tell you a couple big ones that I see every single time, and it doesn't even have to be a named storm. We could have a Tuesday afternoon shower in South Florida that dumps 12 inches of rain on us.
Good
It's
point.
that easy that it can happen, right? So I think first and foremost, don't be the building that leaves their roof door open. I always have one where I have a board member who has the key to the roof and they forget to lock it or it gets not shut all the way. It's really important. I'm a big believer in checklists, checklists on top of checklists. And it starts with you as a manager and having a master checklist, right? Because ultimately you are the one who is responsible for the structural integrity of the property. But then you can't be the only one that's buttoning up your building or your HOA. So we need to make sure that there's a delegated task list to our operations people for the physical out in the field work. I love a checklist for them because then you can hold them accountable that they've gotten their list of tasks done. I also think that that spreads into your internal office teams as well. The communication that goes out to the residents as a manager, that always doesn't always have to come from you. If you have a template, have your assistant manager or your admin send that, and having an internal checklist for them, because you also need to secure your physical office for
Hmm.
hurricanes as well. And Raphael, for everybody on this call, I'm going to send out checklists for all of these things for you after the call. So you
Excellent.
will have some resources, but I'm a huge proponent in everybody having a task to complete on a list. So that way, at the end of the day, before you leave the building, every little I is dotted, every T is crossed. And I think that that's one of the most important parts of the preparation physically when you're leaving the property. The other thing that I really see a lot of people do either really well or fail is on the general maintenance of their property. I call it your June 1 list of
Yeah.
doing a property walkthrough. I prefer, so with URI, we have a specialized emergency response program where we take care of it for you. But if you don't have that contract in place with a restoration company, it's imperative that as a property manager, you're walking your property prior to hurricane season. And some things that I look out for are potential water intrusion. So I would start on your roof and go through your asset. So looking at if you have HVACs on the roof, are they hurricane strapped down? Even though it's not your responsibility for maintaining that item, you're the one that's going to be dealing with it post-storm. If they're not strapped down correctly, if they cause damage to the roof, you get to deal with that. So it's what can we do now and think outside of the box that will help us for hurricane season. As I go through your building, I think about the condition of the roof, the HVACs, the cooling towers, making sure those are in proper working order. I then think about the interior side of the building. Do we have old windows that we are responsible for as an association in maintaining? How are the seals on those? What does the caulking look like on the interior and the exterior? Buying a tube of caulk at Home Depot is a minimal expense rather than having wind-driven rainwater intrusion where you're drying out your whole property because of that. I'm also doing a physical walkthrough of the exterior ground level floor. What are you responsible for maintaining on your first floor of your building? Do you have amenities? Maybe you have a gym, maybe you have a social room. Checking the areas on the exterior around is something as simple as landscaping. We don't think about, is the landscaping graded away from the sides of the building? I think that that's such an easy fix by contacting your landscaping company to fix that prior to hurricane season, which will prevent a lot of water intrusion damage from it being graded into the building. Another thing that we kind of briefly missed over are your contracts. I think contracts prior to hurricane season are your
Mhm.
best friend. And where I would think about starting is all of the asset that you maintain. What are the most important things when you return post-storm? I can't come and help you at your property if you have landscaping in the way. You can't get on your property if you have landscaping that is blocking entrances and exits. So having a contract with a landscaper to say, where do I fall on your list post-storm? And what is that going to cost me? I want to know that prior to going into storm season with somebody that I'm giving my day-to-day work to. Where do I fall on your list? And you can ask that, and it's okay. If you ask me, where do I fall on your emergency response program? I tell you, you are this number right here, and you're going to ask me, how do I get higher? And we'd have that conversation, right? And I think that these are just smart business choices when it comes to protecting our asset, our properties. So think about what other contracts you would need. Raphael, what would you suggest as a management company that they look for?
Yeah, so I mean, I do want to touch up on that contract and mentioning of the list because I know we mentioned that many times to our teams here, and it's important to know that, and more importantly also is getting that pricing as you said earlier out of the gate now,
Mhm.
because like anything else, you're going to get fly by night companies that are going to come in when there's a hurricane, and you don't know what the rates are going to be. You're going to be in a very difficult situation and you're going to feel like, okay, let me just get this done. And little will you know that either they're not insured or they don't have the proper coverages and so forth. When it comes from the management side, what I think it's important is some of the points that you just mentioned is knowing, where the shutoff valves are, and not just you as a manager or not just as an assistant. It's really even the board knowing because the truth is, for the board members that are on the call, most likely your manager is going to be at home. They're going to be home doing what they need to do. They'll stay there till the last minute. They need to go protect their assets. And then as soon as they're able to come back. So in some properties, depending on the size and depending on the size of the team, in some instances, maybe a team member will stay. But ultimately, everyone on the board should know how to be able to turn off, how to turn those water shutoffs off. Also, it's equally as important is what are going to be your protocols if you have, let's say, a gated garage? Are you going to leave the gate or the garage door open if you don't have a generator? How are you going to manage that? How are you going to manage the communication to the residents? Are there elderlies within the building? How are you going to manage that situation if you don't have a generator, like probably 80% of the properties in Miami-Dade County or South Florida, I should say? So those little details are what you're going to want to know. Also, even sometimes as minimal as even just pets. I mean, now there's probably more pets than humans in the world. So it's important to know, how are you going to manage that situation where you have an older person that has a pet? There's so many little complexities that go into it. So it's important that adding to that checklist are those little tiny details of what's going to be the experience with the residents. And more than anything else is communicating to them earlier on. For instance, simple things as deductibles. We don't want to go too much into the insurance world, but deductibles boards have been selecting to go with a 5% just because of the way costs have been in the insurance side, both from a general liability as well as a windstorm. So, what are these deductibles looking like to your residents? Because if you're not communicating that, and then you find yourself in a situation where you have a $2 million deductible and you have to pass a special assessment, those owners that have an HO6 policy, not a big deal for them. But those owners that don't have insurance, it's going to be a hefty bill. So, and actually, I take that back. The HO6 is only going to cover a certain amount for special assessment. So, if you're communicating earlier on with your residents of this is what the expected deductible is, this is what the impacts, this is what the challenges would be, this is how we recommend you can deal with them, then you're putting yourself in a better situation. It's still going to be a difficult circumstance because having to deal with an emergency or with these catastrophes are never easy. I don't think anyone could ever say it's easy. But if you're communicating earlier on, letting your residents know of what's to come, not only are you showing your level of professionalism as a manager, um, but you're doing what's right and serving the residents the way you should be serving them as a manager. And as you were talking, I launched a quick little poll as well, and it's amazing that 50% of the people that participate in the poll said they don't have a checklist. So super excited that Erin's going to share a list. Also, we can share a different list. So we'll make sure that we share that as well. So talking about insurance, I think it's a good segue to ask you, what should managers and board members know regarding their insurance properties and the property damage losses? I know you probably see a little bit of everything, even outside of hurricane. So maybe if you could give some tips and tricks on that and what they need to have.
Sure. I'm glad that you brought it up. So let's start at the basics. So when storm season comes and we have an event that occurs, it is no longer a per loss occurrence. So your deductible could be for a per loss occurrence right now, anywhere between like $5,000 and $25,000 for water damage, right? When it comes to storm season, it changes from the per loss occurrence to a percentage of our total asset. So talking round numbers, if your asset is worth $50 million, then your deductible is going to be 5% probably at this point, and you'd be at a $2.5 million deductible before your insurance company even kicks in any money towards the claim. So where do we go from here? Loss occurs, $2.5 million is what we need to talk about today. So as a manager, I challenge you, go to your board and say, hey, this is the information that we have at hand. Before we can file a claim for hurricane season, we need to talk about the 2.5 million and how we're going to finance that. There's a couple different ways you can do that, and talking with your trusted banker is my biggest recommendation because they have products that, like a line of credit. There's a lot of different ways that they can get creative in preparation for storm season. The last thing you want to do is call them after the storm and say, hey, I need money to pay my contractor, because I can tell you right now, you're going to be sitting in a long line of people. So getting proactive and having that conversation today with the board and your financial institution, super, super important. The other thing that we spoke about in insurance this past year, there's a lot of creativity that can come within a policy. I am not an insurance expert, but your agent is. And there are also professionals out there, public adjusters, that can help facilitate the process when it comes to filing an insurance claim. And I think it's so important that as a property manager and a board of directors, that you realize that there are resources and professionals out there to help that happen. I give you all the documentation that you could possibly ever need to file a claim and be paid successfully. But what I can't do is help you adjust that claim. And I think that PAs in this last storm season were essential for the recovery of especially condominium properties in Fort Myers Beach and the affected areas on the West Coast, because the insurance companies were denying people left and right when it came to the work that was being done. They also can work the policies and the intricacies to get you more money that you may be owed and don't even realize that you have access to. So I think that, I know, Raphael, you're a huge proponent of a PA.
Yeah.
Anytime there's a large and complex loss, I highly recommend 10 out of 10 dealing with a licensed insured industry professional to help walk you through the process.
Yeah, excellent points. Yes, I'll touch upon that, but the public adjuster side, yes, I totally believe in their work, especially, unfortunately, like all industries, some, you have bad actors, but the truth is that most professionals, at least individuals that you and I would be working with, are professionals in and day out in the work that they do. And I'm a big believer in it because the difference would be is that, you can't count on your managers to be your public adjuster. That's just not going to work. They need to help be in assisting in getting companies such as Unlimited Restoration in, people that are gonna mitigate the damage and bring things back to what they should be. And there's a whole legal process that's involved when you're dealing with insurance companies. I also believe that it's equally as important for managers or those on the call is that you have the physical policies. In an ideal world, you have a certified policy, but don't wait till you have damages to then say, okay, let me get my insurance policies, because you may have many exclusions. And in reality, what you want to do is you want to be able to review these policies beforehand so that you understand where you are. More importantly is also you have to be very careful how you file these claims when you're fighting these claims. And that's why, I believe heavily in the public adjuster, because managers with all the good intention or board members, sometimes we're just in the gist of it and just trying to resolve the issue, serve our clients. And we may respond to a question that the insurance company may ask you incorrectly or not in the way that they want you to respond. And then all of a sudden you're finding yourself having to deal with that difficult situation of, that's not what I meant. What I meant was this. So yes, I heavily do agree on having the right professionals, the way that I like to say it, having the individuals that are experts at what they do. So I do want to go over the poll. Glad to see that 91% of our respondents do have their policies. Great work there. However, no one that responded has a line of credit. So I do want to touch on that. That's, many of the banks, and as Aaron mentioned, the idea is to, if you have a management company, have your management company help you and work with your banking partner. There are a small fee with most banking, but it's very minimal to what, the benefits that you would get of having that line of credit. And I think you said it well, Aaron, of, if you understand what your deductible is and you understand what that differential is of what you should have, if you can get a line of credit of that size, depending on your building, because every association is different. But yes, getting early on what the process is going to be. In most cases, getting a line of credit for a hurricane deductible or for these kinds of things, it really isn't that difficult. The underwriting guidelines are very simple. With most banks, we work with a lot of different banks in our space. So if you don't have one, I highly recommend that you obtain one. I wanted to ask you, I know I can go into this all day long, but from your side, how can you leverage technology and, let's say, digital tools to streamline some of these, property damage responses and the recovery process? So number one, all our associations are looking for much more transparency and obviously accountability. So what tools have you seen or that you use?
I love technology. Technology is my friend. It is also your friend, and it's the way of the future. I mean,
Yeah,
everything's gone AI, right?
yeah, 100%.
So I want to talk about a couple sides of this. On the property management board director side, I think it's imperative that you have a communication tool for post-storm recovery that is not your cell phone. Last year, Hurricane Ian, we did not have service. Once you got off of the highway, and on the West Coast, you head west. But once you headed toward the beach, there was no service. So you couldn't communicate in any way, shape, or form.
Wow.
So WhatsApp is a great alternative. Highly recommend 10 out of 10 that your teams use that tool. We also had communities that had Facebook groups. So when you had Wi-Fi, you could communicate on property damages, when people if it's safe to return back to the property. So I think that those are really great tools. On the property management side. When it comes to your business partners and your vendors that are servicing you post-storm, I think that question needs to be asked to them. How are they communicating post-storm? How is your property going to recover? How are you going to communicate with them in those situations? Because your business partner should have a plan for that, especially if they're a restoration contractor or a landscaper, because we're your two first responders for post-storm recovery. On the restoration side, we have a really cool technology, and my company does. We have a portal where we put all of your pre-loss conditions on our
Mm,
portal and document everything. So if you are an emergency response program customer of mine, I have all of the contingency information that you need on a cloud and on an app. So you can access it via the internet, you can access it on your phone at any time. And it also prints out to a printable version that you can keep in your binder. And I'm a big binder person when it comes to post-storm recovery. God forbid you don't have power, you can't get access to the cloud, you can't get access to any sort of technology. You have your hard copies of everything. And I think you really need to keep that all in one place. So technology is your friend, and documentation within the technology, making sure that you set it on the cloud, photos. We have another technology that we use for job management where you can access all of your documents live, daily updates. You'll know when our technicians are on the way to your property because you receive a text message. And there's a lot of really great progressive companies out there that do the things that we do. But I think it's important that you ask that question. What are you doing to communicate post-storm is your number one when you're dealing with a contractor.
yep. Yeah. Being that, again, going with the theme of being proactive and asking the right questions. Many times if we don't ask the right questions, then you set these expectations, and when the situation happens, a storm or whatever it may be, then you're frustrated and you're wondering what went wrong. And the reality is, if you dig and look back, it's, you didn't ask the right questions earlier on. And again, that's where the importance of having a right partner is, because as you stated, you're already giving this the value ahead of time, before you're even providing the service, by doing the reports that you stated you would do, going through the properties, having a good understanding, supporting the managers. I know from a management side, that's what we always look for in strong partners, how, what value and support you can provide us. Because as I'm sure you've dealt with many different managers and regionals and vice presidents, in the midst of storm, in the midst of day-to-day association operations, it's never easy because we have to deal with the resident side of things. So it's important to have the right partner to support you there.
I think that you said something that I'd like to also touch on is expectations. As a property manager and a board of directors, it's imperative that you set the correct expectations for post-storm recovery with your community. So what I mean by that, physical location of where your property is located dictates how we can get to you post-storm. So if you're on a barrier island, you are probably one of the last places that's going to start getting
Yeah.
post-storm recovery, because the government's going to start clearing the roads that are our main roads, our arteries, 95, 75, the turnpike, and then they kind of push out from there. Are the bridges up? Have they deemed it safe for us to go to the barrier island? Have they cleared the barrier island? So those
Yeah.
expectations you want to make super, super clear with your community. We actually had in Fort Myers Beach, don't do this. This is a no-no. One of our board members was on Fort Myers Beach and they stayed on the ninth floor of their condominium building
Wow.
when they had up to the fourth floor with water from the ocean coming
Wow.
in, sending us videos, sending us like live that when they were there. We couldn't get to them for almost a week.
Wow.
We were the first responder restoration company on the beach, and it was 7 days until they deemed it safe for anybody that was not a first responder to get onto the beach. So those expectations are real life scenarios of life safety. And that is the most important part of post-storm recovery is life safety, making sure that you're safe when you're going back to the property. And we'll talk about post-storm recovery in a few minutes.
Yeah, no, that's great that you brought that up because, unfortunately, we fall into bad habits. People, oh, it hasn't been that hard. I mean, if we look at how the West Coast has been hammered the past few years, it should be we need to keep it top of mind that can happen down here in South Florida. We've been very, very fortunate over the past couple of years. So it's important because imagine 7 days. I can't imagine that, like 7 days, probably no power, because if the
No
waters were
problem.
at 30 feet, I think it was, or 23 feet in certain areas, you have no power. So that means food is going to be very minimal if you have enough. So yeah, it's very important for managers. Again, we have a big responsibility to communicate that, depending where your property is located, right? Not every property is the same. You have some properties, let's just say, on the coast that are much higher, but either way, if you're on the coast, most likely, if it's a direct hit, you're going to be asked to evacuate. So what are you going to do if residents don't evacuate? What's going to be your protocols? How are you going to protect your board? Are you going to have the attorney send a letter? So there's a lot of things that go into it. And, again, sticking to the theme of the webinar and being proactive and asking yourselves these questions now will make it much easier, because hurricane season's in June. No one can predict when it'll hit, but traditionally the peak times of the season comes August, September. So now is the time to get started, so that you don't feel like you're rushing around at the last minute. So Aaron, I know that there are local resources or national resources that are available, for properties and residents in these emergency situations, or for even preparation. Is there anything that you want to touch up on any of those points or tidbits that our managers and board members should have top of mind?
Yeah. So I think where you always start is local with your local municipality, because if you go on their website, they actually have a hurricane guide that is specific to your location. And why that's so important is because your residents need to know where there are shelters, that allow pets, because there's a big difference between the two, and
Mhm.
where their local resources, if they need to evacuate, where they can go. So I think starting locals is number one, and making sure that your managers sign up for the local alerts. It is a huge game
Great tip.
changer to get the local alert saying that the roads are deemed safe in your location where your property is, rather than going off of national news, statewide news, governor news, right?
Yeah.
So the other thing that I think is a really common misconception is We have FEMA. FEMA will pay for if I have property damage that my insurance carrier won't pick up. And it's true to a certain extent, but the average FEMA claim for Hurricane Ian was $36,000. That is nothing in
Nothing,
the grand scheme of
nothing.
recovering a condominium or an HOA property. That's not even going to cover most likely your landscaping bill, let's be
Correct.
honest, right? So I think that there's this misnomer that and you don't want to rely on FEMA. FEMA is a government funded agency, and we all know how the government runs at a slower pace. They're not in a timely fashion. So I want to bring that up as well. As far as national and other resources that you have, I love NOAA. It is life when it comes to hurricane season, and they're really accurate.
Yeah.
Pathing the storm, NOAA is your best friend. And as your restoration partner should really be sending out updates to you. I want to talk a little bit more about your restoration partner as well. It's imperative that you have a contract for post-storm recovery, an emergency response program. Every company that's reputable out there has some version of that. It's a no-cost contingency program that allows them to get to know you and your property and make sure that you are both a good fit for each other for post-storm recovery. And make sure you ask your restoration contractor, where do I fall on your list? I need to know. Am I at the top because I give you $150,000 in business every year? Or do I have a low frequency of loss and maybe I'm number 72 on the list? We want to talk about those things in those relationships prior to the storm coming. So you have a partner. The last thing that you want to do is to use a company from Chicago that has no clue how buildings are built in Florida, that have no clue on condominium or HOA law down here, that come in and cause potential destruction to your building. And then you, as a manager, a management company and a board, are on the hook for this big bill that it just wasn't a good idea to use them. And I challenge you when you're vetting your vendors to ask them for a referral. Ask
Yep.
them for a referral from another building down the street that they work with that would give you a glowing recommendation. So I believe in that.
Yeah, and it's very important in your space because the dealing with restoration work is not easy. In any way, you're having to go into unit owners' units, depending obviously on the loss. You have to remove things from their property, whether it be laminate flooring, whether it be baseboards. In certain instances, probably expensive art. So there's a lot that goes into it. And last thing I know from our side, if we're working with someone that we don't have a strong partnership and we're dealing with difficulties, and listen, we all have difficult clients, but ultimately we want to make sure that they're doing 80-90%, really serving the customer. There's always going to be that small majority that causes issues, even though your team is delivering well. But it's important that they understand the protocols, the process, how to treat the residents, the challenges that come with dealing with residents in the midst of emergencies. So having that experience and having that wherewithal of how to deal with these situations does help for both the management side as well as the board, because if they're delivering on their services, then you're not getting those phone calls from ultimately people who are your neighbors. So we've spoken a lot about post storm. I think it's now get into like during the emergency. So I know you mentioned a bit about having that book and having taking pictures. To what extent do you recommend documenting? I mean, we all have now, I hope everyone has a smartphone by now, but we all have the capability. But to what extent do you recommend managers and board members documenting, let's say during the crisis? I guess a somewhat similar story to what you said about the gentleman or the couple in Fort Myers.
So documentation is life. So prior to the storm, we call it a pre-content inventory list. So we'll start there and kind of walk our way through the loss and the recovery. So prior to the storm, you don't need to reinvent the wheel, but we do want to make sure that you have accurate records of all of the items that the association owns. So what I recommend is having your maintenance team support you in this and taking a video of all of the assets that the association is responsible for maintaining. So that could be amenity rooms, gyms, especially I like to see this in how much equipment you have in there. Could be tens of thousands of dollars. We want to make sure that that's documented. God forbid we have something come through the window and all of the gym equipment gets wet and ruined. I think about these crazy scenarios that I see all the time and the potential risk and liability. So what I would do is take a video, set it and forget it on the cloud for post-storm
Mhm.
recovery of everything that you own as the association, including your mechanicals. I think we forget about our generators, our electrical rooms, but those are so important in a post-storm recovery situation. So that's pre-storm. During the event, if your property or if you have people staying at your property and you're starting to suffer damage, I love videos, I love photos. There's nothing like a blown out window on the 17th floor, allowing water intrusion to come in from 17 all the way down to 1, right? There's nothing like that physical video when you go to submit your insurance claim that this is what happened. This is the source of loss. And that's for not just post-storm recovery, but any day-to-day losses that you have at your property. You want to document what the source of loss is in a photo or a video. It goes worlds when you're filing the claims. When it comes to post-storm recovery and returning to the property, safety is key first and foremost, but documenting every physical damage that you can possibly find. And you start with the exterior of the building and you work your way inside. There's two things I want you to keep in mind when it comes to post-storm recovery and returning to your property. And that's, am I wearing the right equipment? So at the very bare minimum, I want you in a rubberized soled shoe. I love a work boot or a rain boot if for us ladies returning to our properties. No heels, no cute shoes. We're gonna get dirty. And the goal is to make sure that you get home to your family safely, right? If you have a lot of down debris before you enter your property, don't just pick that up or have your workers pick that up with gloves, and just make sure they're moving things around. The most common thing I see, and the reason why, are water moccasins post-storm, which are a deadly snake. So if you get bit, that's a huge issue for us, right? So just doing your due diligence and being really careful. And the last thing that I want you to look for before you're entering your property are down power lines and any sort of sign or symptom of gas, whether it's a natural gas line, generator gas. Those are huge symptoms. Your nose knows you should not be entering the property if those two things are in play. Hope that answered your
Yeah,
question.
no, very great tips, especially with regards to, what you can and can't touch. I think it's very important to know, what you're getting yourself into and being prepared. And the way we like to look at it is, we tell our managers it's not just about you, it's also the team members that you're going to be dealing with, your team that's going to be supporting you throughout the recovery part of this, or you know, do you have the equipment as you mentioned? Do they have the rain suits? Because many times you have rain right after. Do you have even simple things of water and food for the team? Because the team is the one that's going to help you get a lot of these things resolved, communicating with the residents. Do we have enough food? Do we have generators to be able to maybe potentially just supply the initial equipment that you will need? So it is very important that they have these things top of mind. Many times I know that during the last storm that we've had, and you mentioned about the landscaping. The last one we had here in South Florida was more of, a lot more landscaping challenges. And I remember vividly, people not in other communities calling, hey, we want to make a change. Look, right now in the midst of a hurricane, now's not the time to make a change. And no one had gloves, no one had food for their staff members. They didn't know where they stood in their list. So it's again, it's important to have these things top of mind. And with regards to communication, during the storm, it is very challenging. What success stories, I guess, have you seen, with regards to communication, as we were talking a little bit earlier, or what does URI do to help in that communication pattern with the residents?
So with URI, we've already begun our hurricane planning process, and we have our own internal process prior to going into season to help support our clients. The first thing that we start doing is giving you templated informational one-pagers to send to your residents, because remember, as an association, we can manage what we can manage, but we also need to help our residents. So sending them a don't forget before you leave for season, button up your shutters, pulling everything off of your balconies. We have a lot of seasonal properties down here, and that's only going to be increasing with the amount of people that are moving to South Florida
Right.
and all over Florida, really. but that helps you in your preparation if they've already got these things buttoned up. So I think it starts now in being proactive. URI also, if a storm is predicted to approach, we start our internal process of communication, of communicating to you, Raphael, and say, this storm has the potential to hit your coast. Here's a list of things you can do at 72 hours out, at 48 hours out, at 24 hours out. And then we say, as a part of our program specifically, we have an automatic post-storm response. So if I don't hear from my clients, I'm going to show up at your property and make sure
Mm,
that you do not need my services. You will get phone calls from us. You will get text messages from us. We will find you post-storm to make sure that you do not need any services. And I think there's something to be said for that for your internal process as well, making sure that you have that communication tree, I call it, and a backup plan. I love a buddy system, and that's what we do for unlimited restoration. So if my west coast of Florida gets hit, then my east coast of Florida becomes the information hub and obtaining all of the loss history. And I have a hurricane buddy. So as a manager, if you can't get to your property, who's your hurricane buddy that's going to go to your property and check it out for you? Because it's going to happen. It's
yeah.
not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, and having a plan A, a B, and a C.
Correct. That's great. That's a great benefit to have because we didn't talk much about it, but I guess I want to ask too as well is like how, your resources because I know there's different firms and different sizes and so forth. How do you guys work with when it comes to resources? So if a big storm does hit out here in South Florida or on the West Coast, how do you manage that?
Great question. So we have assets outside of the state of Florida. My company covers pretty much east of the Mississippi from Philly to Key West.
Okay.
So what happens in a storm situation, if Florida gets hit, my assets in Philadelphia, DC, everybody shifts down to help cover our clients across the state of Florida. And we don't take on clients without being able to cover them for post-storm. A lot of big national companies will come into your property and say, hey, sign this agreement, we'll cover you post-storm. But if they're a big national organization, that means that they have national accounts. And you're one condominium building, if you think that you're going to get service post-storm, I can guarantee you're not going to. Because they're going to service the clients, the Starbucks, the Home Depots that
Yeah.
give them millions of dollars every year. So it's important that you ask the right questions and say, where do I fall on your list? I'm one individual association. What's my buying power when it comes to a storm? The other thing I caution you against in the restoration world is franchises. Franchises like a ServPro almost.
Hmm.
ServPro is not a national organization, they're a franchised national organization. So when they shift their asset down here for post-storm losses, you as the customer are incurring more fees for their asset to move here because they have to pay franchise fees to the restoration contractors. So if you are located in Broward County and the ServPro franchise from Jacksonville comes down to help Broward, you're paying for that on the back end.
Mm,
And that's not covered by insurance.
interesting. And that's why it's important to have those pricing sheets earlier on and asking the right questions early on as well. Excellent. So one thing I didn't get to touch up on in the whole video and the documentation that just popped up as you were talking is an important tip for both managers and board members. Many times we want to take just a picture of a flood or water on the floor, and it doesn't give you a perception of, what level it is. So, make sure you're framing that camera the right way, that there's a point of reference somewhere. I know, when I started the company, we started Bootstraps. I was a manager when we first started 17 years ago. And, I would take pictures where I either had my fingers or a ruler. And, that helped the public adjuster like you can't imagine, because the argument was if it was less than an inch of water and that ruler, my finger said, no, listen, this was 4 or 5 inches of water. So, when you're documenting, just don't go wild on the pictures. Think of it as if you're defending your association, defending the case that will be represented, either if you decide to go to public adjuster or not, whatever route you decide to go, but being able to really frame that story properly. And I think what you said about the video is equally as important. So let's go. Sorry, go ahead.
No, absolutely. Essentially, you are framing a case
Yeah.
for whatever route you decide in filing the claim. Remember, insurance companies are in the business of making money. They're looking out for
100%.
their best interests. They're there to collect your premium, and they will find any reason to deny your claim when it comes to water damage every single time. So really telling the right story is so important when you're choosing a partner and when it happens and you're the first responder.
Correct, correct. And then, I want to get into the whole insurance topic. But I remember the other day, there was an interesting article, the whole argument of Florida being a fraudulent state and all this, and they just debunked all of that. So, yeah, that's why I think it's so important to have representation. So let's get into the recovery phase. So, I know one of the biggest challenges for managers, and board members, because they deal with it as well, is, the recovery process itself, understanding that things take time to repair, not that it's either your fault or anyone else, but it is a process. So talk to me a little bit about the recovery process after, property damage has happened.
So for day-to-day water, not talking about storm season, if you are drying out a property after water damage, the average dry time is 3 to 5 days with the proper equipment. That can be extended due to insulation, specialty finishes within a unit, or an HOA. But normally 3 to 5 days should be about max. At that 5 to 7 day mark is really where you want to have the conversation with your restoration contractor. Can this be dried properly without secondary damages? And for us in Florida, that's mold. That's what we want to avoid at all costs, because it's cheaper to mitigate dry out than it is to remediate, which is the physical removal of potential mold or building materials that have been impacted. So 3 to 5 days for the dry out, and then the post recovery will depend on what is actually damaged. If we're talking just minor drywall, you're looking at 2 to 3 days max. If you're talking large loss, it's the time to hang, tape, mud that drywall and get you back up and going. So really circumstantially, it's going to depend on the project. When it comes to post-storm recovery, we're talking a different animal. So in post-storm, most of the time what we're dealing with is floodwater and wind-driven rain. So floodwater is considered Category 3 grossly contaminated water, and it carries liability. We simply just don't know what's in that water, especially post-storm. When we dealt with Hurricane Ian, there was all sorts of debris, dead animals. It was disgusting. And in your insurance policy, it's called a gross muck out, and that's the coverage that you're going to want to look for to make sure that you have. And there's different levels of that, but it's very technical when it comes to that. But Category 3 water is flood water, and that is removal and replacement of all porous building materials. So your drywall, any sort of curtains, upholstery, couches, any contents that are inside, carpets, carpet pad, tack strip, all of that has to be removed because it's Category 3 water. And your insurance company wants that. Now, if we're talking wind-driven rain, that's the rain that's going to be coming through your sliding glass windows and door. That's inevitable in a storm situation because we have leapholes on our doors. But there are things that you can do and advise on as a property manager and a board. The product that I like the best is called Pig, and they make water mats and water socks. I use them in my own personal home. They can put them in front of their sliding glass doors, and the sock goes in the track itself, and they actually can be washed and dried and reused. And that's PIG, like the animal pig products. The
Nice.
other thing that we can do from the association side is have the right tools in the post-storm recovery process. I love an antimicrobial called Benefect and BioEsk. BioEsk is actually the one I use in my own personal home. It kills the COVID-19 virus, and it's an antimicrobial. And you can have your teams just be cleaning with this on a very consistent basis. It'll help mitigate any potential of humidity blooms for summer. But post-storm response, it's a great product to clean hard surfaces that can stay on the property. Highly recommend 10 out of 10. You can actually get it on Amazon. But if you're going to be buying in bulk, I suggest going to your maintenance supply company to purchase both of those items. That's my biggest tell-all with storm. You can't avoid the wind-driven rain. And I just put new PGT windows on my house. They're only rated for 45 minutes at 120 mile an hour direct hit wind-driven rain before they have water intrusion.
Wow.
What, isn't that crazy? Brand new
Wow.
windows, 45 minutes for water intrusion. So
Wow.
it's about being prepared
Yeah.
internally. So all the windows and doors you have in your community, water mats. I love water mats, and then sandbagging. This sounds stupid, but I'm going to say it anyway because I always have a couple communities. Sandbags go on the outside of your building, not on the inside. Just throwing it out there. You
Oh,
never
it's
know.
no, never a dull day in this industry.
Oh, I could tell you stories for a
You
long
really
time.
did see that? You really did see that? Yeah.
Every season, every season.
I'm
It
sorry, it was
happens.
hard to hold back there. All right. Well, actually, we're getting close to the last few minutes. So I wanted to ask Aaron, you've provided some serious golden nuggets here. So maybe you've exhausted them all, but I guess if there's one or two tips that you want to leave for the managers and the board members that are on this webinar, and then also how they can reach you.
Absolutely. Um, Number one big takeaway is communication with your team. I think that doing things like we're doing right now are great for the managers and the board members, but your team internally needs to have an emergency services meeting. What is our process, procedure, and expectations from start to finish, pre-loss, preparation, and post-storm recovery? And how can you better prepare this year than you did last year? I think that it's number two, second fold, is communication with your membership, making sure that you set clear expectations and telling them the why behind it. If you're shutting down elevators, why are we shutting down all the elevators and pulling them up to the third to fifth floor of your building? Because if we don't and the elevators get damaged, we're looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars that the community will then need to fix them. And that tidbit is more important than just saying all the elevators are going to be shut down in the building. And I think that the why behind all these things, I hate to say like scare tactic them a little bit, but especially for my barrier islands, I tell them you are not going to have electricity, you are not going to have elevator usage, you are not going to have the amenities here that you're used to in your luxury condominium building. And let them know we cannot come save you if something is going to happen. If you stay here and there's no police, there's no emergency services. I think is so important for them to understand why we're saying that you need to evacuate the building.
Yeah, those are definitely some great tips. I personally believe you can never over communicate similar to what you're stating. I think it's understanding as a CAM and as a board where your property is located. You still need to over communicate no matter where you are. If you're completely inland and all the way in the suburbs, look at what Hurricane Andrew did to Homestead. So it's equally as important for us to communicate of what's expected or what we believe can come and why things are being done, as Aaron mentioned as well. And the closer you are to the coast, the more important it is that you even have even more communication because, again, as she stated, you're not going to have power. So you want to be working with a big provider that can actually bring in the generators to be able to do what they need to do and provide the work that's necessary. So that was going to be one of my tidbits as well. And then more importantly is if you haven't started, is to start now and start doing your practice sessions. So what are practice sessions? Just picking a busy, non-busy day, even though my manager is probably looking at me, go find me a non-busy day. Find a day that, you could practice with, even with a board member. It's not just your team, because you got to remember, not all, some people do have vacations, and some people do take vacations in August because kids are out of school. We try to limit that because we understand it's the prime time of hurricane season. But getting your practice sessions in, finding out, okay, where are the gaps in my plan? Hey, I didn't. How would we have dealt with this if something had happened? The golf carts, if you're thinking they're going to work, what happens if it does flood? So just going through those practice sessions and saying who's going to be responsible for what's going to happen if someone is out, how are you going to compensate for that? And just think of these little details so that when it does occur, you're still going to be challenged, but it'll be less of a challenge because you've thought several things through. And then it'll also improve your communication, because not every property has a big team. There's properties that don't have a team. So you just want to be able to communicate that to your residents. Listen, this is how we would handle it. This is what the expected timeframes would be if you can tie in certain things, the time frame. But I'm glad to hear that everyone pretty much loved the webinar. We had 92% of the people gave it a 4-star plus. So great work, Aaron. I want to thank you again for being on today's webinar. And if you could let them know how they can reach you via email, via telephone, what's the easiest way for them to reach you if they want to really get that program started with you and get signed up earlier on with your organization.
Absolutely. And thank you all for joining us today. We know that you have a million things you could be doing right now, but spending this time with us, you're already ahead of the game. So you will all be receiving a email from me today with my contact information on it. You can feel free to contact me via email or my cell phone number. We'd be more than happy to partner and see if we're a good fit for hurricane season. Part of our program comes with a property walk. We do it twice a year for you to give you those benchmarks. Like I said before, we do have an app that is cloud-based that you will, all of the information that we spoke about on this webinar, you will have and be successful in post-storm recovery or any day-to-day loss. And again, thank you for having me, Raphael. I appreciate you.
Excellent. Thank you. Always a pleasure working alongside you. I wanted to thank everyone that attended. As I always like to say to both board members and managers, I want to applaud you for taking the time to get just a little bit of knowledge that's going to help you to become a better leader for your community and for your association. If you're an association that's having any challenges with management or just have no guidance whatsoever, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We have a phenomenal team that would be here to support you. But more importantly, it's not just the team, it's the partners that we work with, such as Aaron and URI. Thank you so much for being here today, and we look forward to seeing you in our next webinar. Have a good one, everyone.
Bye, everyone.